I'm going to get rolling, and I'm going to start with a little two-part story. Part one is a very interesting client engagement that I had about a year and a half ago, where an old friend called who was in a fairly new role at an association. And we know how the new leaders are always coming in with their new broom with new ideas, which is great. And her challenge was that it was a very small staff group. At that time, there was a total of 4 mighty people doing everything. It's a global group. It's in an academic area. And she saw lots of potential for a non-dues revenue program beyond what they already had. She also knew that they did not have very much bandwidth yet, but what she really was challenging me to do was to come in and talk about mindset. And this harks back to many of what Bruce's learnings have been, which is sponsorship revenue, partner revenue, anything other than what members pay from dues should be part of the overarching priority for everyone on staff. So I thought, well, this is the most interesting program I've ever developed for someone. We can do that. And it was so exciting and so invigorating, and it gave me a fresh look at what I can do for small staff teams, which is they're not always ready to go to a full partner program. But how can we get some first steps going to help them out? Now, the other point that I wanted to make in my adjacent story is about this interesting book that I only discovered recently, although it's 2018. Here it is. It's called Thinking in Bets. It's by Annie Duke, and it is subtitled Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. Now, she did not write it for the association world, but everything I read in it is so relevant to what we do. As Bruce mentioned a little bit ago to us, it's avoiding the letting perfection get in the way of getting things done, although you phrased it more elegantly than I. But again, it goes to mindset. And it's the reality that running an association, including any decisions on changing your non-dues revenue program, involve making many, many decisions where we don't have all the facts. What is interesting is that what we're going to discuss today is many of the ways you can leverage the knowledge that you do have, identify the knowledge that you need to have, and move on with the decision without belaboring the point. Because we all know that doing something is better. Even if you're not making a decision, that's a decision. You are delaying an improvement. What is your doctor going to tell you? Well, I wish you'd come to me, 3 months ago. I don't know why I went down that dark corner. But it's just a matter of how can we make the decisions we have to make every single day on everything to run our associations when we don't have all the facts. So we're going to talk about that. And one of the things that I loved from this book is she says, if you say, I don't know, that is perfectly fine. But instead of the end of the sentence, that needs to spur you into more exploration. If you don't know the answer to that one, what do you know? So let's get rolling. I am Barbara Armentrout. I am the voice behind BJA Solutions for Associations, where I specialize in helping them with non-dues revenue to catapult them into bigger learnings. And fortunately, I am joined by 2 other experts. So Venu, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. It's Venu Deschetti. I'm with the Event ROI Coach, all about data. I started this off thinking that I only want to specialize in event data. But you know what? That darn data is sneaky and gets into every department within an association, and it's all connected. So if there's something to talk about data, I'm there to help you.
And I'm Bruce Rosenthal. I've been actively involved in corporate sponsorship partnership programs for about 16 years. The first half of that time as Vice President of Corporate Partnerships for a large national association, and the last 8 years as a consultant and advisor to associations to help them leverage corporate sponsorships to increase revenue and member value, and just published the book Mastering Association Corporate Sponsorships last month. So delighted to be here with Barbara and Venu.
And I just want to reinforce what Venu said about that darn data gets into all departments. And one of the issues we have discussed in previous conversations is that so often it doesn't get into other departments. So we'll talk a little bit about how it can. Okay. Bruce, you got a question to toss in my direction?
Sure.
I'll just keep talking.
That's all right. So what we often hear from associations, prospective clients in webinars is that, our program's bringing in a fair amount of money. We're doing pretty well. We don't really need to change anything. So is that true, Barbara? What are the first steps an association should take to determine, are they really bringing in, are they leaving money on the table? Are they doing really well? Or are there some steps they should take to advance their program?
Great question. And one of the retorts that I try not to say, depending on how well I know the person asking it, is how much is good enough? One of the things that I hear quite often is our clunky old AMS that we bought in 19 something or other is not serving us, although very few have that old of a system. Their technology is outdated, which slows down what their team can do to serve the membership, which is what we're all shooting for. And are their earnings flat? Can they budget knowing that they're going to get X number of dollars every year because that's the same amount they get? Well, do you want the same thing on your own salary? No, you want increases. So some of the first steps that I tend to recommend is to look inward. Instead of looking at your list of sponsors that you already have, find some low-hanging fruit by cleaning out some of the underbrush that is keeping you from seeing what you know. When I look at a prospectus, I immediately think of an analogy that I think Bruce originated for me years ago, which is you go into a restaurant and you know you're hungry and you want to make a decision to get the food that's going to satisfy you now. And if you go into Cheesecake Factory, you could be there for 30 minutes working your way through that menu of items. So let's make sure that our prospectus or our media kit does not look like the Cheesecake Factory menu. Don't give your potential customers and buyers too many choices, because if you're given too many choices, you don't make a decision. Also, look at the expensive programs that you offer to your sponsors that no one ever takes. So why are you wasting time and space on them? And then I also recommend they look at opportunities to outsource, especially if I'm working with smaller teams. And most of the smaller teams I've been working with lately are wonderfully blessed by good leadership who know we don't have to do everything ourselves. There are experts out there, and it might be a fractional employee, or it might just be outsourcing your ad sales business. But that's before we even look at the list, before we look at any of the data or anything else. Vanu, do you have any first steps you'd recommend coming at it from a data angle?
Well, I think it's kind of just seeing what you have, right? Like you mentioned, like what do you have? You know, you may not have all the answers to everything, but start with what you do have and see, what are some of the starting points there? You know, if you only have your registration list and you don't know what sessions they went to, don't worry about it. You know, like make that plan for later, but start with who you do have and breaking it down into different demographics that might help you, or what that might help your sponsors or partners or whatnot. But definitely, don't let that be kind of, what we're going to talk about next is barriers, right? Like don't let not having enough data or crazy data that's out of control prevent you from actually taking a look at what you do have.
And if I can just interject for a second, the data you just recommended we need for non-dues revenue planning is also relevant for event planning before anything happens, as well as if you're evaluating a membership program or if you're evaluating an education program for your association. You need that same basic analysis of what do we know about our members. Sorry,
Absolutely.
I cut in front of you.
No. And I think that's a really good point, because sometimes I think we think about what data do I only have, that I only have access. And the question could be, what other data could be beneficial that others may have in the organization? And, if you don't know the answer to it, it's a great conversation to have, right?
Yes.
Across departments, across team members, of saying, I've worked on workshops where even people on the same team didn't realize someone else had data points that they could use. And it just opened up a whole great can of worms, right? To go fishing.
Right. If anyone listening to this webinar today has barriers or things they want to put in the chat, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll address those. The other thing I think we often hear from associations when they say we're bringing in as much money as we can from our sponsorship program, they'll say, well, we've also talked to the sponsors and they say they can't spend any more money. Well, no customer buying anything is going to say, oh yeah, I'd be glad to give you more money. But just to use one of my restaurant catering examples, if somebody goes into the caterer and says, I got a tight budget budget. This is all I can afford to spend. And the caterer outlines a menu. And then the catering director says, well, would you like decorations with that? Would you like the upgraded place settings? Would you like entertainment with that? All of a sudden, yeah, that would be a nice upgrade. I really need that. That would add a lot to the party. We generally walk out of those conversations spending more than we thought we would. So I think when we go to companies and say, well, what are you really looking for? And what are you trying to solve? And if they say, wow, we'd really like to reach a segment of your members. And then we say, wow, what if we put together a couple focus groups of our members? So you can still get your big booths and your banner ads and all that, but let's do a couple focus groups. That's when the company begins to say, oh, well, that is more value, and they will pay more for that.
But alternatively, also, Bruce, it's not always about getting more money, right? Sometimes it's about proving value and being a good partner and retaining your partners, right? It's always harder to get a new partner than to retain a partner. And to be able to take, whether it's data or creating new programs or revamping your program, right? That is, taking a look at it in a different way. So your purpose could not, maybe it's not upselling, and that's okay. And making a better program so you have longevity with your relationships.
Right. Well, and you're right, and it is about that partnership, and it works both ways. So, I think for organizations that are thinking about changing, vamping, upselling, whatever the changes they are thinking about with their corporate partner program, start by talking to the corporate partners and just say, we're thinking about making some changes. How is the program working for you? What else are you looking for? How do you define sponsorship success? It doesn't mean you need to do everything the company says, but they really like to be in there first to be part of the discussion as compared to the association going to the company and saying, well, as a staff, we've been working on this for 6 months. Here's the new program. Do you like it? It's much easier to bring in the companies early on as part of the conversation, make the changes in the program, and then go back to the companies and say, wow, that was a great conversation 3 months ago. Your ideas were really helpful. Here's the new program. They will be much more receptive to want to be part of it because it is a true partnership then.
Well, and to go back to your catering example, you mentioned that, you left the meeting spending a lot more than you planned when you walked in, but you're happy about it because you helped build it. You influenced the outcome of what you were gonna spend on. So there was value, not just cost, that was added to it. But nobody seems to be putting any barriers into the chat, or maybe my chat is a barrier to me this morning. But
now that must mean everything's hunky-dory in everyone's association. Everybody's got great.
Well, but I mean, the whole concept of we don't need any more money. But there are some other barriers out there. So Venu, what are some of the data gaps where you see where the teams are just, I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier, but other departments aren't grasping the significance of the stories that the data could tell them if only they would learn to pay attention and share.
I'm a big believer that association professionals do value data and they want to spend time on data. But I really think there's an issue of just the capacity to take data on, right? Like we're all very busy. We're all just trying to get that program done, especially in the meetings world, right? We're just trying to activate our trade show. We're just trying to activate the things that we do already have. There's just simply not enough time. I think, but with that barrier, if you kind of step back and take some time to think about, if I was to think strategically about this and think about the data and think about how data can help me, it can actually help save some time, right? Planning, you can plan better, you can have stronger partnerships, you can stop spinning wheels on bad partner activations that aren't working and aren't keeping partners happy and keeping them, I think that we have to spend, have to invest that time. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. There are ways to use AI. I actually did a fun session in Rhode Island this past week, talking about just using AI as a way to help with creativity in the thought process. It's that second brain, someone to
I wish I had attended, yes.
And bounce ideas off of. It's, and it had nothing to do with uploading a list or proprietary information. It was simply a creative bouncing board. So to be able to take some of that strategic time so that you can get more time in the future could be huge.
And Bruce, I wanted to ask you about your ways getting over the barriers where you turn hesitation to excitement, but I want to acknowledge Melody has given us an excellent barrier that many, many groups see. The internal discussions of what benefits are included with membership versus what are extra. Now, we're going to keep this in a non-dues revenue context, so I'm guessing you mean affiliate members or those who get some kind of sponsor benefits with their membership. Is that accurate, Melody? And in any case, is the first thing that, before I offered any solutions, the first document I'd want to look at is the daggone bylaws, because some groups amazingly have membership definitions in their stinking old bylaws, which I'm not a fan of, as you can tell, but sometimes these exist. I was on a conversation this morning where there's a group that their bylaws say that anyone over age 65 has dues automatically cut 50%. And because it's in the bylaws, the membership department really can't change that. But that had nothing to do with any benefits that they get. But 90 times out of 100, your bylaws will not be a barrier here. But just check the facts on that. It's an easy thing to do. And as association professionals, we should all look at our bylaws from time to time because there's such interesting reading. Then the next thing to look at is what are the practices that are giving extra benefits that come with membership, and what are extra, and what do you pay more for? And if it's just a behavior pattern, anything's on the table for change. Bruce, you look like you were about to.
Well, I was going to say, and this definitely ties into what Vanu was talking about with the data. But I think the other answer to Melody's question is, what does it cost to provide those benefits? Does it cost more than the revenue you're bringing in? And I'll throw in yet another, our third or fourth restaurant catering analogy in the first 20 minutes. If it's a restaurant that says, wow, we give everybody a free dessert, and the crowds just keep coming in, but we lose money on every customer because of all these free desserts. Why are you doing the free dessert? So it's not in the restaurant's bylaws. And this may involve doing some cutbacks on benefits, because often when we talk with associations about revamping their sponsorship program, they'll say, so taking Melody's example, when shifting a little bit to sponsors instead of corporate members, that sometimes associations are giving those sponsors just way more than if they actually factored in all the association staff time. It's a money losing operation. And there is also some value in exclusivity. So if it is something like offering focus groups to corporate partners, we don't offer the focus groups to every company that's a corporate member or that's paying an extra few $100s for an exhibit booth. Those are exclusive benefits for those who pay more. But this is really a data-focused business operation, not for profit, granted, but it's a business operation. We shouldn't be giving away more than it costs in the revenue we're bringing in from those memberships.
Well, and I hark back to the days when I was the point person for sponsorships for companies that I worked for. And I was coordinating about 15 trade shows a year for this group. And I was attending many of them and then coordinating teams to attend others. But for anything, any of the deliverables, like, we need your freaking ad, and we need it yesterday, and it needs to be this size by this size. And there would be times when I would just look at it and say, I'm getting this free of charge, but I do not have the time to resize my ad for a one-off use where I am likely to not show much benefit for doing it. And I would respond, skip me, I'm not doing it. And I would keep getting little reminders. And I felt so bad about the staff spending their time reminding me of things like that and other things that were on the list of your benefits that I had no intention of activating. And then I would go from being sad about their time to annoyed about it. And then I would miss an important deadline because they had sent me too many reminder emails. But yeah, the new year.
Yeah, no, it just reminded me when during the pandemic, when we all went virtual and we were all doing these virtual trade shows, and we had these elaborate trade show setups for virtual setups, right? Like you had to add logos and all your documents and this banner size and that banner size. And it was just overwhelming to create for an exhibitor or a sponsor to create their virtual landing page was almost a full-time job. Like graphics had to be involved and marketing. It just became too much. And I think I saw a trend where a lot of organizations were like, we can't ask our exhibitors to put this much work into it.
Right.
But also, what I also saw were that a lot of these companies were like, well, if we're spending all this time in creating this digital asset for a trade show that only is seen 3 days out of the year, why don't we just create our own and just have that up, all year round? And that's a valid question. And I think that's a thought process we need to think of when we're creating programs of, is the value just for a few days a year versus all year? How much we're not only asking them to invest their money into the organization, but it's their time, right? And I think I've seen an evolution with events of how much information we are asking from exhibitors and sponsors and how that's being used, and it, sometimes scaling back those benefits were a better value proposition because it was balancing the expectations and the investments that were needed for that activation.
So I think it's really, as Barbara said earlier, you can just look and see what benefits are companies using and not using, or what is selling and not selling, or especially for the top tier sponsors, just ask them, what do you see value in? What do you not see value in? And it's not necessarily going to be the same answer for every company. So one company might say, wow, we're going through a brand change. We need every banner ad, every logo placement we can get. And another company, as a company told me years ago when I managed the sponsorship program at an association, Bruce, we've been a sponsor for 20 years. Everybody knows who our company is and what we do. We don't need another logo placement. So it's going to be different for each company. But even just asking the companies is a huge differentiator for your association, because most associations aren't asking, they're just assuming, and they're giving that Cheesecake Factory list of benefits and saying, here you go, you're getting more and more stuff, pay more. And the companies are like, we don't want the stuff and we're not going to pay more.
And Barbara, on this topic, you sometimes talk about it's not only asking the company, right? It's who do you ask at the company?
Exactly. Because if you ask the person who's responsible for renting the 10 by 10 and making sure there's a trash can for $15 a day, that is the limit of their task list, and that's their vision. So if you ask them, Vanu just described a wonderful year-long partnership that would support the company as well as giving valuable information to members. The person who does the 10 by 10 is not going to be able to wrap their head around that most frequently. So you need to make them your bestie, and then also find out who they report to. And ideally, you'll get to a VP level who is of a title that has the vision for the year-long plan. Well, I know time is scooting. I also wanted to get on to revenue diversification and setting priorities. So, Bruce, I'm going to challenge you back to one of your favorite themes. Why should non-dues revenue be an overarching priority? And how does that relate to helping associations when they need to prioritize their revenue initiatives and all of their shiny, bright ideas?
Whether an association has 4 staff or 40 staff or 400, we've often seen, and Barbara and I used to lead Partnership Professionals Network discussion groups pre-COVID, and often the biggest challenge that folks would talk about, even when they had titles like Director of Sponsorships, they were like, I'm the only one that's involved in sponsorships at all. And I even say to others on staff, and you work with me on this corporate partner, and they say, oh no, that's your job. You're in charge of sponsorships. And sometimes it's like, well, we have other things to do. That's not my responsibility. One area in which there is a very effective overarching goal for all associations, that's the annual conference, the annual meeting, where everybody on staff has a role. Prior to, during, and after, either to develop sessions or work with networking groups or help on site with registration. I think most associations, 95% of the staff are on site, regardless of what their title is. And we can do the same thing with non-dues revenue. It is important to the entire organization, and it's something where everybody can have a role. It's very much a marketing agency model, because the account exec in the marketing agency actually does not deliver any direct services to the client. The account exec, which I think is very similar to the director of sponsorships or partnerships in an association, is really kind of the go-between, the connector, the traffic cop, and then works with all the different divisions within the marketing agency. So when I was VP of corporate partnerships, I didn't deliver many direct benefits. I would work with the education team, the data team, the membership team, the public policy team to deliver those benefits to the corporate partners.
And if any of those teams happen to be outsourced, you can be the point person for them, because they need somebody to answer their questions also. So you don't have to sell every ad and that kind of thing.
Right. So for this concept of, Vanu, of overarching goals, non-dues revenue is an overarching goal. How does that work with data? Because I would think there'd be a lot of
Ah,
teams that would say, I don't do data. I'm the public policy person. I'm the education person. I do education. I don't do data. How do we get those folks involved in recognizing all the data, who's buying what companies are involved, what's selling, what's not selling?
Well, I think just as it's kind of, we talk a lot about data and storytelling, how to use data to just kind of tell a story, what the insights that's telling us. But you can also use data to do the persuasion, right? To get the internal
Mm,
buy-in. And I think a lot of it is just having that exploratory conversation. It's almost like therapy, going to the policy department and say, what's going on in your world? How having the conversations of, if we had sponsors involved, what would that look like? What kind of data would we need? Or what do we need from the policy department to support, to say, we've got a advocacy day on the Hill and we get 500 people go there every year and they meet with X number of senators or congressmen and we made an impact of this much. That's huge, for a partner who is interested in advocacy and impact to go back to them and say, hey, we had an advocacy day and we made this impact. That's a great story to tell, right?
mhm.
It's not necessarily about the number of leads, but again, it's aligning the mission, right? The mission of the organization, the partner to the mission of the association. And in advocacy, I think that's one great example, Bruce, to just throw out there, because that's a department that tends to, they do their own thing, right? But there's
mhm.
definitely relevancy and there are definitely ways to support. Sometimes organizations, partners don't want that recognition. They want to be able to support those efforts because it's important to their business line, but they don't need the logo that's splashed everywhere or, like you were saying. I think being able to identify the departments and what the relevancy is, it's not always, and again, you don't have to do every department. Figure out what's important at that time. What can you handle as what's possible? But just having the conversations of, I think it's interesting when you bring people together and you talk about what your goals are and ask for that help. People tend to be like, well, I can help you. That's something easy. I've got that in my back pocket.
Right. Yeah, one that I used once that really hit staff close to home when I worked for an association. I was doing the staff briefing at the all staff meeting on update on the corporate partner program. And I put up a slide with the 20 corporate partners. And I said to staff, the paychecks that we each got yesterday, here's the percentage of your paycheck that came from these 20 companies.
Hoo, hoo, hoo. That's a hard one to not.
And that's where the money, because most good, or really all good corporate partner programs bring in more revenue than they actually spend. So
And it's
scale it up,
unrestricted revenue.
unrestricted revenue. So scale it up, scale it down, depending on the size of your organization. When I worked for a $18 million organization, $0.8 million was coming in from corporate partners, 20 corporate partners. I was the only full-time staff person running that program for a while. So figuring out whatever my salary benefits overhead were, that is well over $1.5 million. It was being used for other salaries, research, public policy, other bills that the association had trouble paying.
That's great. Well, and I was wanting to segue to big ideas for small staff, and we have a question that has been submitted that is spot on for this segue. You seem to be advocating for customized, tailored solutions for each sponsor, which takes a lot of staff time. For a small association with only one or two full-time staff wearing multiple hats, that's hard to do. How do you find the balance between custom solutions that take more time to keep track of deliverables and standard packages that give staff a chance to work on a process? And there is no one answer for all situations, just as applies to everything to do with association worlds. But at one point I called it, you always need the gum and candy bar money. No matter how much time you have spent in the grocery store going through your list that you have agonizingly prepared, they still have you wait in those lines with all of the little grabbable things they hope you're going to pick up. And sometimes you're adding $15 worth of empty calories before you know it. But you know what? The store needs to sell. the gum and candy bars and all of that. So I am a strong advocate for keep some of the standard packages. I know Bruce shares my dismay for
Hmm.
what we call the medals, your gold, silver, bronze. There is a place for that, particularly when you don't have a team doing things. So, and if you've been doing it for a number of years, you've got people who are trained for this. And it's what we refer to usually as a transactional sponsorship. You're going to tell them about this, they're going to do that, and it's done. A chunk of your money, that's absolutely fine. You don't have time to nurture all of those relationships, although you do still want to listen to them. But what I like to do is identify the top sponsors in terms of both the dollars and the engagement. Are there people, companies who are always willing to volunteer? We've got a white paper on that. Bruce, I remembered you mentioned at one point your members really needed a legislative review, and staff didn't have time to go through 800 pages of legislation, but one of your sponsors did and had a white paper ready that they could share. And so although Bruce has mysteriously, probably his internet did some naughty things, but they were able to go to this sponsor and get a white paper that was co-produced with the association that gave the members what was needed and made the sponsor over the moon happy about it. What I do like to advocate, though, is going through the top sponsors, having serious listening panels with them. And yes, it is a lot of work. It's a lot of nurturing. If you have 4 children, which one gets all of your attention? All of them do, right? So I keep the list of the top dollar custom packages short because there is only so much time in the day. There are only so many things that my gray cells can comfortably juggle without getting confused. And you have other things to do in your job. No question about that. But those are the ones who can really catapult your earnings from the little augmented, we're going to do a $50 or $100 price increase, to thousands of dollars in changed revenue. And that money from those top people has the snowball effect where once it starts its way through the process, it grows. They learn, oh, well, I really liked this. I want to do this again. We had a great session at the annual. We want to do a webinar series on that. Can we sponsor a webinar series? Because your members seem to be really interested in this. Well, we'd be happy to accommodate that. Here is the fee structure for that. And here are all the logistics to get it going. Ideally, you've got somebody on staff. You said only 1 or 2 full-time. But hopefully you've got somebody helping with your education and your remote learning that can help you with that. Vanu, what
Barbara,
ideas
I'd like
do
to
you have?
toss in an idea here as well. I think one thing that when we think about doing like a cost benefit analysis, right? Maybe start off with taking a look at what are you currently doing and what is that costing you? And I'm not talking about just the hard cost, of signage and logos and all of those things. I'm talking about time. Like, what time are you investing in doing your current program?
How long does it take to prepare those signs that you then have to pay for?
Yeah. How much time are you spending communicating with exhibitors or partners on getting logos or activating something, right? Like actually track that. If you can't track, estimate. I think you can come to a pretty good estimate of that. That's in one column. In the other column, you want to take, what you would like to do. What are some of the ideas to change your program? Kind of estimate what those times are going to look like. What's your time investment? And I'm pretty sure you're going to start looking at some things you're going to like, well, why are we wasting our time on benefits that people don't care about or programs that aren't selling? Why don't we shift it a little bit? And it doesn't have to be, like you said, Barbara, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can start morphing it. You can find ways in your strategy here to focus on the things that are really effective, that are making an impact, and even like make an impact with your members as well. Right. So I think it's really would be beneficial to go through that. And that's actually a data exercise, believe it or not. It may not be coming from a data source, but you are the data source, right? So your time, your staff time, your organization's time is valuable. Please, please, please calculate it.
Well, and at one point I was working in an hourly billing situation and commissions on top of that. So I was constantly keeping track. I felt I should be paid like a lawyer because I was tracking my 15-minute increments, for heaven's sakes. But at the end of a couple of weeks, it really revealed to me a task that I thought I was knocking off in 15 minutes was actually spread over the 2 hours to think about it, the time to do it, the time to fix it because I had built it on some faulty analogies. Oh, yay, Bruce is back with us. I am so
Bruce is
happy.
back.
Yes, yes, almost back, yes. But sometimes just keeping track of your time, even though it seems like a pointless exercise, especially if you're a full-time team of 1 or 2 people, but keep a little track of, and you don't have to do every little thing for heaven's sakes. I took a break for 10 minutes to get coffee. No, but the major tasks in your week that you feel make a difference in what you want to get done, and credit yourself for the time you spend thinking about something, not just the time executing it, because it's the planning that is the secret to everything, right? So give that some thought, and as Vanu said, put that into your cost benefit analysis. Because anybody can do something stupid really quickly. You want to do something smart based on what you already know. And Bruce, I hope you've made friends with your internet again. Yes?
A power outage. Everything went dark.
Oh my
Can you?
heavens. That's kind of
Anyway,
rude.
yeah.
And Paula
So
has
actually,
just
what? So
told.
sorry, I missed the last few minutes. But I was going to make one point earlier, right before we lost power. The question about very small organizations. I would
Yes.
say start small. You don't have to start with
Mm-hmm.
10 corporate partners. It can be 1 or 2. And I
Yeah.
did work with an association a couple of years ago, a staff of 4. And the executive director decided to take the lead, that she would find the time. And we worked with her to come up with a whole new structure for the corporate partner program, to do the outreach. And she brought in 2 new corporate partners within a couple months. And that brought in enough revenue so she could
Mm-hmm.
hire a part-time person to run the program. And then fast forward another 4 months, and she called me and said, Bruce, I got a problem. And I said, okay, let's schedule a call. What's the problem? And she said, we're sold out. We sold all 5 partnerships for the coming year. What do we do now?
Oh, bask in the
It's a good
glow.
problem to have, create a waiting list. Whether you call it a pilot project, whether you start with just a few calls, start with your current big exhibitors or whoever's buying the most advertising and say, we'd like
Mm-hmm.
more of a partnership relationship. And it can be 1 or 2 companies until you start seeing the success and tweaking it, and then maybe hire someone to run it.
Are we okay for running a few minutes longer because we have a little more to cover, but I also want to touch on Paula's question if we can.
Yes, let's definitely get to Paula here. She's got a great one.
Okay. No, you put it in the right place, Paula, because we saw it.
We
So
got you.
to break it down, individual member associations where the group is gun shy about the dues revenue ratio versus the non-dues revenue. And valid question, how much is enough? And we don't want those people spamming our members. Well, we're not even going to go into the spamming situation. That has nothing to do with accepting their support and sponsor dollars. Bruce, since you got cut short a little bit on some of your minutes, how about if you tackle that one first?
Sure. I think one thing to look at it, it's become much more competitive, especially since COVID. And basically, companies can reach and teach members without the association. They can create
Yes.
their own online communities that they can curate through social media and doing their own webinars. So I think one of the questions for association staff and boards to think about, companies will reach and teach members. Do we want those companies to do that on their own, or do we want them to do that inside the association's tent and with the association, with the appropriate guardrails, with the appropriate guidelines? There will not be spamming of members. There will not be big sales pitches. The companies have gotten very good at educating members on their own. Let's find ways to say to those companies, and especially it might even be some of the companies you see out there doing pitches to members, bring them inside the tent and frankly monetize it. If you don't want the revenue, if you don't need the revenue, companies will go off and they will reach members on your own. I'd rather have both the revenue and for the association to take credit for. We provided 8 webinars this year instead of 3, and 5 of them were with the support of our corporate partners who helped us provide the faculty and the education for those webinars.
And something to keep in mind is I do not believe in sharing email lists with sponsors. Just it's association property. Now, that does not mean that they're not going to go out and scrape it and get it on their own. So do not take the rap if you have a sponsor who happens to spam members. It can mean that you are going to have to give up their sponsor money going forward if they are not a well-behaved sponsor, if they're not conforming to your code of conduct. But don't take the blame just because somebody gets a spam email. And Vanu.
Having lived on both sides of that fence.
Yes, me too.
I can go either way on the email list, but definitely in terms of, like you talk about, Barbara, taking that blame, that it's as much as it is for our job to educate our partners on how to be good partners, we also have to educate our members
and board
attendees about what that world looks like, right? Like, yes, where if you are offering your email list, we're offering up the email list and you get to opt in. And what opt in means is that you're allowing the sponsors to help support this program, right? So not just ask them to opt into a list, but explain why you're asking them to opt in. And hopefully also, it's just not about just opting into subscribing to whatever list or, just providing that, but they're getting value out of that, whether it's content or, there's something, there's more oomph to it than spam. And I think that's part of also, again, going back to partners and say, you would get much further by developing a relationship, providing good content rather than the spammy kind of stuff. Because honestly, that's just bad marketing, bad business.
And you stress to your
Right.
members the value they are gaining. You are not cutting any of their costs as a result of a sponsor dollar.
Yeah, I think also when companies ask for the list, and sometimes it is that more transactional, as Barbara said, the booth person that says, "Oh, I need a list of all 1,000 members. Can you send me their email addresses?" I think a good question to ask the company: would you like to reach a segment of the members? And I've often had companies that'll say, "Oh, now that you mention it, if we could get your members of a certain size company, a certain title, certain region of the country, oh, that's 100 members. Well, how about this? What if we did a webinar targeted based on the expertise your company has to those 100 members? And then afterwards, if those 100 members go to your website, download a white paper, those are your names to do whatever you want with." And not only is that a benefit to those 100 members, it's a great benefit to the other 900 members who are not getting information that is not relevant to them.
And
So
then the
again,
other
another good use of data to go to those data marketing folks on staff and say, wow, can we slice and dice our list in different ways to provide those titles? So it's a great way to involve the data folks on staff and membership folks.
And the other question I tossed Paula's way, not to be confrontational about it, but why does anyone care about the relationship between dues and non-dues revenue totals? What difference does that make for delivering value to the members? Do you do it based, you have asked that, okay. Do they ask how much goes to government affairs, how much goes to education, how much goes to events? Maybe so, but so often, Bruce often says partnership is both a noun and a verb, and it's got to work between the association and the corporate sponsor. It's not just taking the money and then doing what you want with it. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I kept going. We promised to be 45 minutes and we've given you a little bit of extra. And this concludes the 3-part conversations that we've been holding on non-dues revenue. So Vanu, wrap us up here.
Yeah. So whether you joined 1 or 2 or 3, we'll make sure you get these recordings and copies of the slides. Hopefully that can help you out. But also we wanted to thank you all for joining us. We know there are a lot of webinars that you could be joining, but you came to ours. We're so excited. Here are our contact information. If you have any other questions, want to explore some things, Bruce, Barbara, and I are more than happy to connect with you. Here's our LinkedIn. Hopefully you'll do that. And then also we have something fun that we've put together. It's a hands-on boot camp where we actually go into an association. You'll gather your employees, your staff, your cohorts that you want to get on this bandwagon, right? And we'll actually do a workshop with you that will help you go from brainstorming ideas, harnessing your data and figuring out what data you need to take a look at and track and what you need to do with it. And then at the end of this boot camp, it's a 4-hour boot camp. And at the end, you'll actually have a plan that you can go and start activating. So we'll walk you through that. So all the strategy stuff that we've been talking to you about, we'll actually go through that with you step by step with you and your team.
But this is not one where you're going to sit on the sidelines and just take notes. You're going to roll up your sleeves and put on your boots and get going.
But we appreciate you all and Have a great week. We will make sure you get all of this good information so you all can get busy revamping your non-dues revenue program. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.